Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the last chapter, chapter 24, in which we see the final confrontation with the monster. After Victor has lost everything, and now he just wants to face his doom. But before we jump into our study, I want to thank all my patrons on Patreon. Thank you so much for all of your support. And if you haven't visited my Patreon page yet, you should go over there and check out the resources I have, including guided study questions to go along with Frankenstein and other works of literature. At the end of chapter 23, Victor had lost Elizabeth, he'd lost his father, he's lost everyone. And he finally tells the story of the creature to a magistrate who doesn't believe him. And so now Victor is lost and alone and trying to figure out what to do. He has no reason to stay here in Geneva, nothing holding him here. All he has left is his desire to face the creature. But he doesn't know how to find it. So the last thing he does before he leaves Geneva is to go to the graves of his family. As night approached, I found myself at the entrance of the cemetery where William, Elizabeth, and my father reposed. I entered it and approached the tomb which marked their graves. Everything was silent, except the leaves of the trees, which were gently agitated by the wind. The night was nearly dark, and the scene would have been solemn and affecting even to an uninterested observer. The spirit of the departed seemed to flit around and cast a shadow, which was felt but not seen, around the head of the mourner. The deep grief of this scene had at first excited quickly, gave way to rage and despair. The deep grief which this scene had at first excited quickly gave way to rage and despair. They were dead, and I lived. Their murderer also lived, and to destroy him I must drag out my weary existence. I knelt on the grass and kissed the earth, and with quivering lips exclaimed, "By the sacred earth on which I kneel, by the shades that wander near me, by the deep and eternal grief that I feel, I swear, and by thee, O night, and the spirits that preside over thee, to pursue the demon who caused this misery, until he or I shall perish in mortal conflict. For this purpose I will preserve my life. To execute this dear revenge will I again behold the sun, and tread the green herbage of earth, which otherwise should vanish from my eyes forever. And I call on you, spirits of the dead, and on you, wandering ministers of vengeance, to aid and conduct me in my work. Let the cursed and hellish monster drink deep of agony. Let him feel the despair that now torments me." And so he calls on the spirits of his dead family to help him. He's gonna stay alive just long enough to kill this creature. He's going to live and live for revenge. But just as he finishes this speech, there's this horrible laugh in the background of the creature, who has been listening this whole time. And then he hears this whisper in his ear of the creature's voice, "I am satisfied, miserable wretch. You have determined to live, and I am satisfied." So the creature is getting his revenge by stirring Victor to continue living in despair and loneliness and misery, seeking revenge, just like the creature himself felt. Victor lunges after the creature, but it disappears. And so he begins a pursuit of the creature which lasts on and on and on. And Victor's driven on by his passion for revenge and his desire to face the creature and finish this conflict. And the creature, it becomes pretty apparent, is leading him on, leaving little clues so that Victor can continue the pursuit. Even occasionally leaving him resources and directions so that he can keep up the pursuit. Sometimes scratching little notes to him in trees or leaving them around. And Victor continues on and on and on, driven by this desire for vengeance beyond what would be normal human endurance. And he talks about how in his dreams he's able to see the faces of his family again, and their spirits seem to comfort him and strengthen him and give him the power to keep going when he feels like giving up. And so although he is alone and miserable and wretched, he still feels as though he's got these comforting friends around him. And in fact, he feels closer to them than he probably did through most of the last part of his life. What agonizing fondness did I feel for them? How did I cling to their dear forms, as sometimes they haunted even my waking hours, and persuaded myself that they still lived? At such moments vengeance that burned within me died in my heart, and I pursued my path towards the destruction of the demon more as a task enjoined by heaven, as a mechanical impulse of some power of which I was unconscious, than as the ardent desire of my soul. And so they're sort of locked into this struggle that's just going to go on and on and on. The creature leads him farther and farther north until finally he reaches these vast stretches of ice, and even then he still has to go forward. He gets a dog sled and pursues the creature onto this Arctic ice. And every time he feels like he's going to give up, he sees just a sign or a glimpse of the creature ahead, and he pursues further. Finally, we come to the point at which the book began, in which the ice breaks up and Victor is left alone on this one small drifting piece, and all of his dogs are dying, and he's in despair when all of a sudden here arrives the boat with Captain Walton. And Victor's like, I can't die until the creature is dead. I can't die until the creature is dead. But here he is basically dying at this point. And so he says to Walton at the end of his story, swear to me, Walton, that he shall not escape, that you will seek him and satisfy my revenge in his death. And do I dare to ask you to undertake my pilgrimage, to endure the hardships that I have undergone? No, I am not so selfish. Yet when I am dead, if he should appear, if the ministers of vengeance should conduct him to you, swear that he shall not live. Swear that he shall not triumph over my accumulated woes and survive to add to the list of his dark crimes. He is eloquent and persuasive, and once his words had even power over my heart. But trust him not. His soul is as hellish as his form, full of treachery and fiend-like malice. Hear him not. Call on the manes of William, Justine, Clerval, Elizabeth, my father, and of the wretched Victor, and thrust your sword into his heart. I will hover near and direct the steel aright. And so Victor hands off the mantle, if he doesn't survive, to Walton, which, I mean, this is a pretty big burden he's asking Walton to take on. Yet Victor feels like he must kill the creature. He must. It is his calling at this point. He's been empowered to do this thing. But has he been? Or is it just the creature wreaking his further revenge by drawing him on? And so we return to the letters of Walton to his sister. And he describes how after he had finished the story, he'd seen the evidence, the letters of Felix and Safi, and he also gets Victor to correct his manuscript and edit it to make sure that it is accurate. All these things to strengthen the reality of this epistolary novel form. And he also reiterates that Victor is really emphatic that he's not going to share the secrets of the creation of life with him, because to do so would be madness. But then there's this exploration back and forth through the end of the book. Victor at the beginning saw Walton as this kindred spirit, this someone with the same sentiment and desire. And at first, he almost wept for him and said, do you have the same madness that I have? This ambition that leads you to destruction, these desires that burn within you, these passions. And so Victor saw that kinship that seemed to be incredibly dangerous. But Victor here also at the end tries to inspire the sailors to keep going and not to quit, but to pursue the ambitions of Captain Walton. And so there's almost this conflict within Victor. Is ambition so great, or is it a terrible destructive force? Walton feels great sympathy and empathy with Victor, and he feels like he's this kindred spirit, this person who feels the same way that he does. I have a lot less sympathy for Victor. I find him incredibly selfish and frustrating in his story. But Walton identifies with him. Walton says, what a glorious creature must he have been in the days of his prosperity. When he is thus noble and godlike in ruin, he seems to feel his own worth and the greatness of his fall. Yeah, Victor feels his own worth. He's still self-absorbed. Listen to this speech that Victor says, and notice the connection to the creature. When younger, said he, I believed myself destined for some great enterprise. My feelings are profound, but I possessed a coolness of judgment that fitted me for illustrious achievements. This sentiment of the worth of my nature supported me when others would have been oppressed, for I deemed it criminal to throw away in useless grief those talents that might be useful to my fellow creatures. When I reflected on the work I'd completed, no less a one than the creation of a sensitive and rational animal. I could not rank myself with the herd of common projectors. But this thought, which supported me in the commencement of my career, now serves only to plunge me lower in the dust. All my speculations and hopes are as nothing, and like the archangel who aspired to omnipotence, I am chained in an eternal hell. My imagination was vivid, yet my powers of analysis and application were intense. By the union of these qualities, I conceived the idea and executed the creation of a man. Even now, I cannot recollect without passion my reveries while the work was incomplete. I trod heaven in my thoughts, now exulting in my powers, now burning with the idea of their effects. From my infancy, I was imbued with high hopes and lofty ambitions, but how am I sunk? Oh, my friend, if you had known me as I once was, you would not recognize me in this state of degradation. Despondency rarely visited my heart. A high destiny seemed to bear me on until I fell, never, never again to rise. Notice again his connection to the archangel who falls and becomes chained in eternal hell. Another reference to Paradise Lost and the story of the fall of Satan, an idea that is fixated both in the mind of Victor and the creature. The two have so much in common. Both of them aspired at the beginning and were crushed by their story. Victor tries to get him to be reconciled to the idea of living and to come back home and be his friend someday. But Victor has no desire to be a friend to Walton. Rather, he's only holding on to life to finish his job with the creature. At this point, the boat becomes mired in mountains of ice, and it looks as though they're going to be trapped and destroyed. The sailors begin to despair, and it seems almost as though they will mutiny against Captain Walton. But whenever they get despairing and angry, Victor inspires them and moves them to their former ambitions. He reminds them of their lofty sentiments and their desires to be great. And are you going to just give that up? How dare you? Again, this compares with Victor's original ambitions to create life and such things. But Victor is fading away in his health, and the sailors are getting more and more agitated. And finally, Captain Walton gives in to their demands that if they can get out of the ice, they will turn around and go home and no longer pursue the North Pole. The ice finally cracks up, and the ship is freed. And the sailors are rejoicing. When Victor hears their rejoicing as he is fading and lying in bed, he asks Captain Walton what the noise means. And Walton explains. And Victor, when he hears that they're turning around and going south again, tries to get out of bed and says, well, then I guess I better just keep going on my pursuit of the creature on my own. You may give up your purpose, but mine is assigned to me by heaven, and I dare not. I am weak, but surely the spirits who assist my vengeance will endow me with sufficient strength. And he tries to climb out of bed, and he collapses, and it's over. When he's finally resuscitated, he's clearly on his deathbed and not going to last much longer. And even he can see that he no longer has the strength to pursue the creature. And so his dreams and his desires, what he thought were these spirits pushing him to overcome and to finally defeat the creature, he's finally realizing that those plans are going to be frustrated. Those plans are not going to happen. And he begins to make a kind of peace, saying that he's no longer driven by burning hatred and his desire for revenge, but he still sees the necessity of the destruction of the creature so that this creature does not continue to pursue evil ends. And Victor talks about his duty towards the entire species of humanity. I brought about this creature. I don't want to destroy the world, and so I must destroy this creature. And he again affirms, I did right in destroying the other creature and not giving this creature a companion. And because he still feels this way, and he feels like it's a duty, he turns to Walton and he says, I ask you to pursue the creature, and I still want you to try to stop the creature. He also, as he's dying, says, oh, I was blasted in my hopes to create new life, but maybe somebody else will accomplish something good. Maybe science isn't so bad. And so he kind of wishy-washies around on this ambition thing. Clearly he's destroyed himself, but even in the end, he doesn't fully embrace the error of his ways, and then he passes away, kind of peacefully. As Walton is writing this last part of the story to his sister, suddenly he hears a noise. And he goes inside the cabin where the body of Victor Frankenstein is lying, and there is the creature. It almost leaps away at the arrival of Captain Walton, but Captain Walton calls out for it to stop, and it is very, very ugly. The creature says, "That is also my victim. In his murder, my crimes are consummated. The miserable series of my being is wound to its close. O Frankenstein, generous and self-devoted being, what does it avail that I now ask thee to pardon me? I, who irretrievably destroyed thee by destroying all thou lovest. Alas, he is cold, he cannot answer me." And so, to something of Walton's surprise, the creature seems to feel deep sense of remorse and regret over the death of Victor. The creature sees the connection between the two of them rather strongly, and he feels deeply. And Walton, somewhat like Victor, never seems to really grasp the way the creature thinks. At one point in this conversation, the creature is going to recognize that no one has ever pitied him, and so therefore, of course, no one can ever pity or understand his grief and remorse in this as well. It's almost as though he's been cursed with just some sort of force that denies all sympathy. Walton calls the creature out as a hypocritical fiend and as a monster, but the creature shows a lot of complex sentiment in this last conversation that I want to focus in on. And the creature underscores his own pain and suffering in inflicting this revenge on Frankenstein. "Do you think that I was then dead to agony and remorse? He suffered not in the consummation of the deed. Oh, not the 10,000th portion of the anguish that was mine during the lingering detail of its execution. A frightful selfishness hurried me on, while my heart was poisoned with remorse." And the creature describes how painful it was to kill Victor's friends, because he was a creature that loved beauty. His heart was meant for sympathy and love and high sentiment. And yet, because of this incredible loneliness and despair and wretchedness, he ultimately sought revenge. And yet the revenge was even more painful for him than it was on Victor. Somehow the two of them ultimately revenged each other on each other by drawing out each other's misery. There's a particularly horrifying moment as well that the creature says after killing Clerval, he was so miserable in the deed that he generally planned to do nothing more. And yet when he saw that Victor was going to turn around and get married and try to live happily ever after what he had done, the creature was pushed back into action. "But when I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence and of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings and passions from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, then impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. I recollected my threat and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing for myself a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master of an impulse, which I detested yet could not disobey." And so we find this irony that Victor rushes into his marriage because he's afraid of the creature's action, but actually he spurs the creature on to action by pursuing this marriage and this happy union with a companion. The two never understand each other, and yet they are such mirrors of each other. Captain Walton, though, just says, "Well, you're only crying like this because Victor's dead. If he were alive, you'd turn right back around and continue your vengeance against him. In fact, you're only really sorry because you no longer have a chance to do evil." And the creature at that point realizes that no one's capable of sympathizing with him, even in this moment. "No sympathy may I ever find. When I first sought it, it was the love of virtue, the feelings of happiness and affection with which my whole being overflowed that I wished to be participated. But now that virtue has become to me a shadow, and that happiness and affection are turned into bitter and loathing despair, in what should I seek for sympathy? I am content to suffer alone, while my sufferings shall endure. When I die, I am well satisfied that abhorrence and opprobrium should load my memory. Once my fancy was soothed with dreams of virtue, of fame, and of enjoyment. Once I falsely hoped to meet with beings who, pardoning my outward form, would love me for the excellent qualities which I was capable of unfolding. I was nourished with high thoughts of honor and devotion, but now crime has degraded me beneath the meanest animal. No guilt, no mischief, no malignity, no misery can be found comparable to mine. When I run over the frightful catalogue of my sins, I cannot believe that I am the same creature, whose thoughts were once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of the beauty and majesty of goodness. But it is even so. The fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Yet even that enemy of God and man had friends and associates in his desolation. I am alone. Again, the connection to Paradise Lost and his role as the devil. But then the creature also points out that everyone else who acted in this story acted with the same kind of cruelty that he did. Felix drove his friend, who had helped him in so many ways, away from his door. The rustic shot him when he saved a child. Am I to be thought the only criminal when all humankind sinned against me? A moment later he says, I, the miserable and the abandoned, am an abortion to be spurned at and kicked and trampled on. You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that with which I regard myself. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of it was conceived, and long for the moment when these hands will meet my eyes, when that imagination will haunt my thoughts no more. And then the creature tells his ultimate plan, which is to leave and build a pyre and burn himself on it, and consume up the last of himself and to die. And in so doing to destroy any evidence of his existence, and therefore no longer bring forth other creatures of misery. And he tells the body of Frankenstein as he leaves that Frankenstein has gotten his revenge. His life was misery, and now his greatest hope is in death. He loved life when he was first awakened to it, but now there is nothing left to live for. Thou wouldst not desire against me a vengeance greater than that which I feel. And so the creature leaps from the boat and sails away on an icy raft. The end of Frankenstein. Thanks for joining me in the study of Frankenstein. You can click to subscribe or to go visit my Patreon channel, where you can find other resources for this book and other works of literature. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.